Hello everyone, my name's Jessie and I am the social media coordinator for Action on Postpartum Psychosis. I'm a mother and I also have lived experience of postpartum psychosis. And I'm here today to talk to Laura and Joe, so welcome both Laura and Joe. Laura, would you be happy to start by introducing yourself?
Hi, so I'm Laura Dockrill, and I suffered postpartum psychosis after the birth of my son 2 years ago, and now I've been working alongside Action on Postpartum Psychosis since.
And Joe, would you like to introduce yourself? Hello, Joe. Would you like to introduce yourself too?
Hi. Yeah, I can hear you. So my name is Jo Black and I'm a consultant perinatal psychiatrist and I work in the NHS. I work in Devon and I work largely in the community. So I work with women who have had previous serious mental illness, who are thinking about getting pregnant again, or with women who are pregnant, or with women who are in the postnatal period, who are concerned about their risk or their symptoms of mental health problems. So I don't work primarily on a mother and baby unit. I work in the community with families who are at home.
Thank you. So today we're here to talk about honest conversations. And so first of all, I'll talk to you, Laura. In your book, What Have I Done? You break down the silence around postpartum psychosis by sharing your journey with the illness. Thank you from all of the women and the families that we support at Action on Postpartum Psychosis for your courage and for talking so honestly about your experience.
You're going to make me cry. It's going to make me
cry. In the early days before you went into hospital, what were the kind of conversations that you were having with your husband, with your family and with your friends?
Before hospitalization, not very coherent conversations. I think, I don't know how much the audience know about your experience, Jessie, but similar to you, I guess, I was going through moments when I didn't believe I was ill, that other people were the ill ones. That I guess I can see why our illnesses describe the symptoms come out so much like bipolar disorder, because it was kind of bipolar but really sped up. So throughout the day I would go, no euphoria, didn't get any of that, but mania, racing thoughts, suicidal thoughts, paranoia, delusions. So I knew I needed help. I really did. And when I was hospitalized, in those moments leading up, I was just so relieved. In fact, the first feeling I felt was relief, because I didn't have to pretend anymore. And there was a kind of not joy, but just like, yeah, just a feeling of thank goodness that I don't have to try anymore, of this desperate clawing of pretending to be okay when I'm clearly not. And that it had been so rock bottom, it could only kind of maybe get better. I knew that's where I had to be. But then I was so confused that I also didn't know I was in hospital. I didn't know if I was at a police station or an asylum, or, which is why the book's called What Have I Done? Just extremely confused. But Hugo has always said now, to pass on to anybody else that is going through it, because the illness is mostly invisible. I mean, there are some signs you can see that do show themselves, but just talk. Your family and your friends, they know you, they trust you, and that is that instinct when you know something's wrong. And I just became, it was almost like when a werewolf turns in a horror film, I could be like, it's coming now, you know, verbalize it as much as you can, even if you think it makes no sense, because that's the only way anybody can understand what pain you're actually going through.
Yeah. And what kind of things did you talk about in those early days, and how did you try to communicate with people about how you were feeling?
Well, I think that the one time that my writing has been any sort of currency, it's never been useful for anything else, but in this experience I could physically, the most one can, because the illness is so abstract, but I could kind of describe it perhaps more than what I would have been able to anything else, because it was so internal. And to my sister, for example, But that's what's so cruel, I think, about the illness, is that it makes you also paranoid, suspicious about people that you love. So you hold back information. You also don't want the health visitor to take your baby away. So you're kind of, it's a complete balancing act. So you've got the psychosis itself, then you've got your rational side of your brain going, hold on, I know I'm going, I use these words like mad because then these words are not prescribed to us when we're young, and that's the only way I can translate to an audience of how I actually felt. But when you feel mad, you know, you're going through that turmoil, and then you've got the rational side of your brain going, but I surely must be able to get better. I need to protect myself and my future for the rest of me. It's the same with the suicidal thoughts, because you have I had a psychosis suicidal strand that was like, I must follow this through. And then a really rational, practical side of my brain that was so scared of that was constantly trying to drag me back in that way. So it's a carousel of hell, basically. You're just constantly trying to balance all these ways, which is why the hospital is a relief, because the first feeling I felt overwhelming flood of safety for a second, which I hadn't felt for a really long time.
And so, Jo, to come on to you next, when you see mums and families in those early days of postpartum psychosis, what kind of things do you say to them?
So I think what Laura said was absolutely kind of spot on about that ability of mums, for a whole bunch of reasons, to find it really challenging to know who to trust. You know, you mentioned that where the health visitor might take your baby away, or the paranoid ideas or delusions or voices are telling you not to disclose. Also, families tell us that, you know, when they've recovered, that once you say it out loud, it makes it real. You know, actually, when it's internalized, you can kind of sometimes pretend, look, I'll be fine, I'm just exhausted. But then as soon as you said it, like you've almost, okay, the cat's out of the bag. And so there's lots and lots of reasons why women find it really hard. I think from my perspective, it's not really what I say, it's how I listen. So listening is really interesting, and we don't just listen with our ears. The things we notice, the things we observe as human beings, we don't leave those behind as psychiatrists. So the way somebody comes into the room, how comfortable they are in space, how comfortable they are in their skin, how comfortable they are with their little person, with their partner. I learned an enormous amount from seeing a couple together and seeing the worry on the partner's face. So even if the mum's doing a really good job, the other half doesn't do a good job at masking in the same way, because he's not, you know, he's really, really worried. So it's just, how do we listen, and how do we absorb all of that information and take notice? Sometimes in the room with a mum and a family, it's about allowing for the silences. So we as human beings, we're always jumping in on the silences. And sometimes when you ask that question, she's taking a minute, you just have to allow the silence, because you have to give her time to assimilate what you've just asked, and then allow her in her own pace, especially if your thoughts are muddled or racing or conflicted or there's voices. Just give her a minute, don't jump in. Now, if you're a health visitor with a 15-minute window to do that visit, or a GP with a 10-minute slot, how do you allow that silence? How do you assimilate? How do you listen, like with all of your senses? How have you got time to do all of that? I think that's really challenging. And the other thing is that I think is really important is the change. So when you've got a relationship with a woman and you've seen her before, and then you see her again, it's the change that's what you're noticing, the differences from what it was last time to this time, what it is that's shifted, and then your curiosity kicks in, like what is that, like what's changed? We you know, something's different, there's a different energy in the room, or there's a different tone to her voice, different speed to her speech, different quality to her worries. So it's why having the same clinicians can be super important, because that way you notice the change. And so all of that stuff is going on before you've said a word. You know, before I've said a word, it's all of that other stuff, which I think can make the difference between feeling like you've left the space for somebody, and you've earned the trust from somebody to allow themselves to be vulnerable with you.
Amazing.
It is
That was
amazing.
absolutely amazing hearing that. I wish I had met you. You might have saved my life.
Well, you know, it's what I do all the time. So I'm also aware that if you're a midwife, you might see one postpartum psychosis or two in your career, you know, or in years and years. So that ability of building up that radar is hard because it's not your everyday experience. And I will say, Laura, I read What Have I Done Yesterday, cover to cover yesterday morning, and I think it should be mandatory training for midwives and health visitors and GPs, because the way you describe the experience and the impact of the changes of shifts and the changes of professionals and what was going on with your body as well as your mind really it's very holistic in terms of giving professionals that insight into what that feels like. I've never read anything as comprehensive as that before, so thank you.
Thank you for reading it as well. But Jo, what you just said, sorry to move over quickly, Jessie, but you just answered such a big question that I always had. When I saw my psychiatrist, who obviously did a great job, I recovered so quickly, so I can't argue with that. He is a general psychiatrist, not just in maternal mental health, but he would ask, I felt like he would check in with me and then he would ask Hugo lots of questions, like, what's been going on with you, Hugo? How's your music? Like, how's everything? But he wouldn't listen to Hugo's answers. He would look at me and I would always be like, why is he looking at me? Like, he would ask Hugo just really nothing about my health and then would just look at me, and I was like, listening to you, I'm like, wow, that was so clever, because that was a time when I would feel like the spotlight was off me, so I could be back and settle into my thing, and sometimes I was withdrawn, or sometimes the racing thoughts had come back, or literally a voice would be like, ha ha ha, you put on a great show, well done, you know, that kind of thing. So now that's just given me like, wow, what a clever technique to do that. Or you'd get angry because you'd feel like, I'm ready now to come off this, or I'm ready to come off this, and then he'd be like, he wouldn't even look at me, he'd go, no you're not, there's your prescription. And I'd be like, because my brain would be like, didn't I put on a performance? And you're absolutely right, you're not listening just with your ears. He was checking for it, you know.
Yes, that's what he was doing. And I think that when you have another family member in the room who knows somebody really well and loves them and cares about them, the quality of the relationship allows me as a clinician to understand a lot more about the context. And so what he did was exactly what you're describing now, is just watching everything, just watching the energy between you and watching your responses, and exactly that, watching you, and you felt the spotlight was off you, because that's when the more of the truth is visible.
It's just unbelievable. And when you're in the throes of it, I mean, I don't know how you felt, Jessie, but I felt like all these things felt so big at the time, like being on the medication for another month felt like failure, being on for another 6 months felt like failure. And the doctor, he's thinking, just be on it for another 6 months, like it doesn't matter, surely your safety is fine. And he'd rather in that room, how to get the kind of what I'm trying to say right, it's just like he'd rather pacify Hugo, as Hugo's the concerned, worried one, to make sure everything's okay. It's okay that I could be on the meds for another 6 months if Hugo feels safer and more secure. Like, that's much less of a risk. So he's got to make the balance, and you've got to make the balance as the professional. You're kind of being a doctor to a whole family, not just a person. You're making sure that Hugo's being treated as well as Jet, because the illness happens to you all. Does that make sense? So he's like, yeah, Laura needs it, Laura might be better, but Hugo's still worried because she's just been saying some really wild stuff, right, not long ago. So Laura needs to be also on the medication for Hugo, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think from my perspective as well, that that support that was offered to the whole family unit. So for my partner, he was able to take part in lots of the ward rounds and to be that really crucial part of any decision making that was happening. And I know that he just appreciated so much all of the support that he had from the NHS staff. Like in particular, there was one, a nursery nurse, I don't know, actually it was a mental health nurse that was in the mother and baby unit that I was at. And as a male mental health nurse talking to my partner Ross, there was just something so powerful there about having another man to be able to speak to about it and to have that that support, that mental health support. And certainly for APP, I know that there's lots of partners, family members who come onto the forum to get that support so that they can be talking to people about what's going on for them as well, because I mean, for me, I don't remember very much of that very serious part of my illness. So for the people around me, that must have been really scary.
I'm so jealous of you.
Well, it comes back, and yeah.
Working down here in Devon, we have a big services population, and I can remember, they won't mind me referring to this story because we've talked about it in training together, but I was working with a couple who had come to see me for a preconception appointment after a postpartum psychosis. Should they have another baby? Checks and balances, what should they do? And I've got this rule of thumb that when I have a preconception appointment, before anyone opens their mouth, if as they walk in through the door, she looks fine and he looks like a rabbit caught in the headlights, it was a postpartum psychosis, because he's remembered every single second, and she quite often hasn't. So it's like almost as they come in, I kind of know what I'm dealing with. But this couple came in and he was a Marine, and he said, look, I've done 2 tours of Iraq and 1 of Afghanistan, and by a country mile, going through PP was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. And he went on to support other dads, because some of those guys who find it hard to be vulnerable, having this terrifying, like just alpha, or on paper, alpha, he wasn't alpha at all, but on paper, this really alpha male, strong Marine, being really vulnerable was incredibly helpful to enable other men to kind of go, oh, okay, it's okay. It's okay to talk about how scary it is.
I bet. Yeah.
And Jo, one of the things that I just found so powerful was being part of the training that you did a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So it was called I'm Fine. And you used this really powerful technique of, so there was a couple who were actors portraying what it was like in those early stages of postpartum psychosis. And as part of the training, you showed other health professionals how to ask questions to each of those 2 people. And then you also had me come along and share my story of what my experience was.
Yeah.
And there was people there who were midwives, doctors, there were paramedics. There was this whole range of people who were there to be able to hear what it's like, how you can help people and support people in those early stages. It was absolutely amazing. And are there any resources that you think that people should be looking to, particularly for health professionals, for training and support to get a greater understanding?
Well, one of the things that we've been campaigning really hard for, and we've had commitments from all of the Royal Colleges, is that actually PP should be on the mandatory curriculum for undergraduate midwives, health visitors, it should be on the train. It shouldn't be if you happen to come across some good training. It should be part of what you know. And there are some really brilliant innovations, even in the last 5 years. So now there are specialist perinatal midwives doing training through the Royal College of Midwifery. The Institute of Health Visiting has got health visiting champions. The Royal College of General Practitioners has got spotlight on mental health GP champions. So I'm really heartened that every profession is taking responsibility for their own bit. It's not just what mental health can do. It's about every single element and every single professional along the journey, and the opportunity. But then it's about how they all work together. So, Laura, one of the things I noticed was that you come across some professionals who sounded like they were really worried about you, but then you go and see the next professional who would reassure you, and it sounds like you were getting such mixed experiences from different people, making different assumptions or assessing the situation differently, and didn't feel like it was joining up. So that's the next phase, isn't it, that we have to make sure that if you tell your story once, it gets understood in the whole system, and everybody who's in your team is singing from the same song sheet. Because particularly if you've got an emerging psychosis and the world's a bit of a muddle and a jumble anyway, if you're getting like different information from different sources, that's unacceptable.
I totally agree with you, and I think from the beginning of my experience, I had as you've kindly read the book, but so many midwives from the beginning, and already when you're pregnant, you know, everyone loves to throw their 2p piece in from the beginning. So you've got all of that, family, friends, strangers, then so many midwives in the ward, so many different midwives, even the cleaners would chip in, and then getting hospitalized, so many different GPs, that in itself alone is enough to send you into a tailspin. Then plus the illness itself, it's just, I think I like to think everybody was doing their best, and obviously now I've just got nothing but absolute admiration. I mean, the NHS at the moment is just incredible, but I do feel my aftercare was perhaps not as as spot on as what it could have been, but I don't believe that's anybody's fault to, you know, that just, I think these things slip through the net, and as you say, it isn't taught. And when I went back to visit the psychiatric ward where I was treated, I was in general psych, they told me I was the first, most of the nurses, I was the first case of postpartum psychosis they'd ever seen. Because one of my problems was, why did nobody ever, apart from Hugo, why did nobody ever sit me down and say, this is what you have? So I was just confused, like, why am I here? They said we hadn't seen it before, and there still has only been one case since me. But I mean, this is a bigger, wider thing. This is not just about maternal mental health. This is about psychosis in general. You know, so many people write to me that have psychosis from losing their job or grief or an accident or an illness. You know, anything can trigger it. And I wasn't even taught this in school, but yet why am I fiddling around with a protractor, which I'm never going to have to pick up again in my life? This is the actual serious stuff. This is what old people talk about when they say life is hard. It's not protractors, it's this. And it just frightens me. And people say, I understand people are scared of talking about psychosis. These are scary words: insomnia, delusions, paranoia. These are frightening words, but it's so much scarier not to know that it exists. And so actually this is a wider responsibility of mental health in general, which it has improved, but I should not be a young mother, you know, running around with a newborn, banging on the GP's door, help me, something isn't right, you know, to not be met with, no, I needed to be put in emergency immediately.
But I wonder whether there's still a hangover of embarrassment or stigma in there somewhere. So one of my, I have teenagers, and a youngster who's a friend of one of my children recently had a first onset of psychosis, and his friends just rallied around like it was no biggie. You know, they genuinely took it in their stride, hung by their mate, you know, just ran with it. He was in hospital, he just got visitors, and then he came out and it was like, yeah, it's fine. And I feel hopeful for that generation.
It's amazing.
Because, yeah, it is amazing. It just felt like it was nothing, you know, and not nothing. It felt like it was big, but it felt like it was no,
like any illness, like
they could take it in their stride. They could take it in their stride, and they could because I think there are resources. Young people are better at keying into information online, and maybe it's being taught better in schools. I think there is an emphasis on mental health in schools. So I feel hopeful, but that doesn't mean it's okay that people who are still, you know, working in the health service, not of that generation, perhaps are embarrassed, you know, and this is kind of internal, I think, dialogue in some staff who don't work in mental health all the time, where they think they know what psychosis looks like. And what I know is I could have 20 women sitting in my waiting room, obviously not with COVID-19, but, you know, at other times could have 20 women sitting in the waiting room in the antenatal clinic, postnatal clinic. And this is all I do. All I do is perinatal psychiatry. I could look around the room and I could not tell which women were the sister, which woman was the woman with anxiety, which is the woman with postpartum psychosis. You can't tell. You can't tell until it's very late. Yeah. But in the early stages, you can't tell because it's not florid the way that people think madness looks. It doesn't look like that. Totally. So it's easy to miss unless you normalize it in your own mind and feel that asking these questions is just like, I laugh with midwives saying midwives are fantastic. Like the first time you meet someone, they ask if they've ever had the clap or, you know, syphilis, cramp, you know, gonorrhea. It's nothing to them to ask that question. Yeah. But then to ask about mental illness, they get all weird about it. so
we're good at having comes from the professionals as well.
Yeah, we need to get over that and make it totally normal. It's no big deal.
Sure, it's so funny because I don't know how you felt with yours, Jessie, but the guilt and the shame was like almost as big as the psychosis. That was like an illness in itself, the shame that I had to that took far longer to get out of. No medication could straight away fix.
I say to women, you'll go through the episode, and then you go through another episode which is coming to terms with what you've been through. That's almost like its own other thing.
Totally.
And it's making sense of it. It's forgiving yourself for bits of it. It's if you think you have to mend bridges for stuff that got said. And I guess, Laura, when I read your experiences in the general ward, one of the things that I have experienced when I've gone to assess women on general wards is that sometimes women in a mixed sex environment in that phase means it's harder for them. And you talked about sanitary towels and bleeding and milk leaking, and sometimes it's harder to maintain somebody's kind of bodily integrity, where the staff don't even think about it. You're not thinking about it because you're poorly, and the staff aren't thinking about it because they've never had a postnatal woman on the ward before. And I kind of feel like one of the things about being looked after by specialist staff is they're not freaked out by milky boobs, and they're not freaked out by postnatal bleeding. Yeah.
Because that was like an extra level of grossness actually that I felt within myself, and I felt embarrassed at my bins, like that there was so much blood, and no one tells you there's so much blood anyway, regardless. I didn't even think about that. That's such a good point. And one other thing I wanted to just say, well, going back to what you're saying about your teenager's friend, is that I think it's kind of, there's a misconception that you're either kind of someone that does get ill or not mentally, like you're either this kind of person or you're not this kind of person. But actually the truth is nobody is immune. And if we all kind of go with that approach, I mean, I said it just the other day when you put up that lovely list, Jessie, of the symptoms, strange behaviour. If we all treat everything like that kind of unattended luggage that could have a bomb in it at a station, you know, what's the harm? You know, what's the harm in a friend calling in saying, I know this could be over the top, but I've read this other article of this person, so I'm just saying this could be PP. What's the worst in being extra sure like that? What's the worst that can happen? And maybe the worst that can happen is the other person's shame. It's like, don't you say that I've got mental illness. And the idea that it's treated like a cancer or any physical illness, which there's no difference between physical and mental illness, it's so hopeful. You know, there are countries where psychosis is dealt with, it's embraced. You know, it's like there are cultures where someone has a psychotic episode in a village and everyone gathers around them. They don't have to do anything. They're fed, they're watered, they're protected, and they go through it, and it's just seen as part of life. And for us, we deal with it, we ostracize that person and isolate them and make them feel even weirder and stranger, and it turns the volume up on the illness and amplifies it. And again, I mean, I felt suicidal again once I was recovered, nothing to do with psychosis, because how do I live with this?
I just wanted to go back to what you were saying, Laura, about the friends rallying around you. I was talking to one of my best friends the other night because I wanted to find out a little bit more about what happened in those early stages for me. And what she said was that all of my friends were texting each other and knowing that something was wrong, but not knowing what was wrong. And so they decided that between them, they sort of got enough courage to then do something about it. So they then got in contact with my mom and said, you know, we think that she needs to get some help. But I just think that there was such bravery in that moment around those, and my friends thinking, you know, actually, yeah, we're gonna treat this like the left luggage and do something about this. But it also reminded me there was a really powerful documentary by David Harewood, which is on BBC iPlayer, where he talks about his experience of psychosis. And similarly, as a teenager, for the person that you know, that when he was younger, his friends also kind of rallied around and helped him. And there was this lovely moment in the documentary where he gets back together with that group of friends and they talk about what that experience was like. And it's just so powerful because, you know, they've got such a strong connection. And
I thought that almost resonated more than the Louis Theroux, actually. I felt it wasn't as mild, it kind of was more brutal. Again, it felt like Louis Theroux, who I absolutely love, you never think though that you're going to be in a subject, you think it's like, oh, crystal meth addicts. You don't think it's you, and then your illness is a whole documentary. But I think anything to do with babies and women, people go, oh, it can't be too, you know, full on and up front because it's babies and it needs to be delicate. And he spent a lot of time cuddling, and I mean, I'm so happy that the show even got a platform. Of course I am, and I'm a massive Louis Theroux fan, but I was like, come on, Louis, when we do any other program, we go there, your programs, we see it all, and take the veil off. Like, please don't do that with us either, because there's babies involved, because this is the truth. And how we're just like, again, adding to the conspiracy and the mystery and the silence of this, making more women feel, oh, but in the Louis Theroux, they all got better at the end and it was all okay. And it's in that David Harewood, I felt more like, no, he's showing what psychosis actually, what a prison it is and how terrifying it is. So I was so grateful for that documentary.
And
I think, from our point of view as well, there is a really interesting thing when either the families or the woman herself drops the veil and lets you know what the truth is, what's actually going on inside of her thoughts and head. And then that's a really interesting moment, because as a professional, you've got the information and you might have a view as to what should happen next. And then you're not only trying to think about her safety and think about the situation of what torturous situation she's in, you're trying to think about where the best place for everyone, what the next phase should look like. And then to bring everyone with you, to bring the mum maybe along with that plan, to bring the dad along with that plan, to give them time to, as a couple, kind of spend some time thinking about what they've just heard and the options that they've just heard. It's not just, it's like the talking is the beginning of things potentially moving in the right direction. But when your head's in a fuzz and in a mess, to be asked to make some really complex, big decisions about where to go, what to happen, what should happen, what do I agree to, what do I consent to, that's really hard. And one of the reasons why a lot of the work I do now is working with women and families who've had an episode before, planning with them. So we're not having those difficult conversations in the throes of psychosis. We're having them way before. We're having them before pregnancy or in pregnancy. We're like planning to the nth degree. We're getting to know each other. We're getting a really, really good plan in place.
So I absolutely love that. I think that's so. I feel like everyone needs to write like a will, like of if you go mad, like a version of a will, and just put it on your kitchen side and be like, this is in case I go mad, not die, but you can't make a decision.
Yeah. And these are the things that I
plan.
find helpful, and these are the things that are really unhelpful. These are the you know, and we can capture all of that. And then if a woman really hasn't got capacity and has lost her way, we can honor that. You know, we've got that written down. We can honor that, and we cannot make assumptions on her behalf, but we can work to the plan that she's
more
asked us to.
useful than a birthing plan.
Yeah. Well, I think that
instead,
if you can, then yeah, I mean, when you're doing your planning, if everyone that is pregnant is thinking as part of that birth planning to consider about their mental health, to know about the illness, to know that it exists, to be able to share with your family, friends what those symptoms are so that they know and can help you if you're ill. And then just, to know kind of where, like how you would want to be supported and things in those situations. I think that it's really powerful.
Yeah. And the best ones are where we do all the work and then we haven't had to use them because next time around was completely different naturally. And it was, the work was done, but it wasn't wasted, you know, and that happens, and that's a lovely outcome.
I wanted to ask next about the recovery kind of later on and conversations around that. So first of all, to you, Laura, in terms of that, when you're coming out of hospital and sharing with family, friends, everybody around you, like what kind of conversations were you having then?
I guess there is a kind of idea that when you come out of hospital that your home becomes this beacon. You're nervous too. When I first went to the hospital, I remember being kind of plunged into this group therapy meeting, and I say it in the book, but this man's, you can see he's happy to be going out but also scared. And obviously that in my mind was like, oh, what do? They institutionalize you here and then you feel like you can never leave. But I was, for me, I wasn't allowed to be on my own with Jet. That was the condition for a week. So Hugo he was never a dick about it, but I felt it was harder for him than it was for me. And in truth, I didn't want to be on my own with the baby. I felt that I didn't deserve his love. Kind of, I was kind of plunged into a deep depression, which often can follow psychosis, if I'm right in saying that, Jo. So I just felt, I guess, very ashamed, very embarrassed. I wasn't sure what the neighbours knew. A couple of neighbours had seen me in the hallway, not doing anything outlandish, but just not being myself. The house felt different to me. It was kind of the scene of the crime, not that anything had happened, but obviously everything reminded me of that same smell. And I made, you make your kind of nest, and anything baby paraphernalia just terrified me. And actually till not even long ago, I still didn't like the sight of a muslin, would tip me over the bloody edge. But then when people want to come over and meet the baby, I kind of, they would say, oh, he looks like Hugo, or he look, whatever they'd say, and I just would see a baby, and it could have been anybody's baby. And that to me just felt like a really sick joke. I was like, I'm a children's writer, I'm a proud big sister, I've always nannied, and I just feel nothing, I can't stop squidging babies on the street, and now my own baby, I just and it did remind me of that nature programs when you just see like a mummy rhino or something neglecting their calf, and you're shouting at the TV, hot feed your baby, and the zookeepers are worried, what if this baby dies if they don't bond, and then it happens to you, and you can't believe it. You feel straight away, because as you were saying, Jo, as well, the kind of tabloid version stereotype of what a mentally ill person looks like. The same as with somebody who's not maternal as well, so you've got that also to deal with, that you're not the Snow White pegging up washing on the washing line, doused in flour, I'm so maternal. You're the storybook cruel villain, horrible jealous person cracking the mirror that's just cold and mean, and you haven't got that in you. And that's another kind of expectation that you feel failure of, that people are talking about you. And then you're someone that's also got to live with being in a psychiatric ward, being institutionalized, being on, you all know someone that drinks too much, that smokes too much, that dabbles in drugs. You don't all know someone that's on a high amount of antipsychotics that has to take an extremely strong sedative to get to sleep every night. So they're all things that you get used to. Typing spaghetti in your phone and your autocorrect going schizophrenia as a suggestion, and you're just like, this is my new language now, and accepting that. It's amazing as well. Like, what's your other option? You shrink from it. Actually, no, but you grow your mind and you be curious and you go, I actually embrace this. Like, what else do I do? You know, coming out about my illness has been incredible, in a way now outweighs the cons, the pros of what I've learned from this experience. I'm so universally plugged in. I'm a more effective friend, a parent. I'm better at my job because I feel like I am enriched by this, not just because of how much I take care of myself and all those other things, but people can actually talk to me now and I can talk back because I'm not deaf of the small talk, basically, which is, and as soon as you say wave goodbye to the blame and the shame and the guilt, that's when your recovery really begins. And recovery is amazing.
That's so lovely to hear. That's a really powerful way to put it, and it's really lovely to hear. I think the bit where you described coming out of hospital with our team, with a community perinatal team, as opposed to just, you know, seeing maybe a doctor in clinic. You know, we have nurses, so women can come out of hospital and they just don't know what the age appropriate play is because they've been poorly. They've missed the last few weeks, and so they don't feel very good at it because they don't know what it is. And actually having somebody just saying, look, at this age, these are some little games that you can play, can be life-changing. Or an occupational therapist having, you know, going out for the first time, putting the buggy up, taking it on a bus, going and doing a shop. A perinatal community team has got, like, it's a family of many parts. So that recovery, as you're building, what you might need is a nurse, you might need a psychologist, you might need a nursery nurse or a peer support worker. And the idea is that we can begin to respond to the stuff that's tricky for mums in that recovery phase, to foreshorten it if possible, but also to help just that, what you described, that kind of, you know, wicked stepmother, you know, cracked face, just to try and normalize, because we see it all the time, and at that moment you've never seen the end of the journey, but we've seen it like 100 times and we know what the end looks like. And in that moment, just telling you, like, just hold on, like, the ending is not, this is not the end, the end's coming down the line, it's gonna look really different to this. Just be patient. We'll you know, you're going to get through this, whether you can believe that or not at that moment. Having somebody just telling you you're good enough, you're doing well enough right now, you're doing everything you need to do for right now, and then it's going to get better.
My doctor, because Hugo once rang him up and he said, I don't know what to say to Laura. I don't know whether to go along with the delusions and the paranoia, or to say that's not true, but then I look like I'm on the side and I push her away. And the doctor just gave the best bit of advice. He said, all you have to do is reassure her that she's going to get better. That's all you got to do, because it is like just keeping somebody alive in that moment. Just going, you're going to get better. That's all you need to worry about. And I think that's the best. Now you're saying all this stuff, I didn't even have that thought that somebody could have come in and helped me do all those things. I'm just even more realizing how grateful I am. Like, he doesn't need any more compliments, but how more amazing Hugo is, because if I didn't have him, nobody came and did that stuff with me, or showed me those kind of ropes. And you know what, you touched on something else, another thing I forgot to say. I don't know if you felt the same, Jessie, too, but there's even more work to do, because it's like you feel constantly trapped, because it's like you're physically repairing, you're mentally repairing, you're getting yourself back in from a psychotic experience anyway. If you normally had a psychotic experience, you'd need to go to like India for 5 years, and now you're like, oh, I'm stuck here with a newborn. But then suddenly I would remember, oh God, am I affecting his whole life? Like, is this what his bad poetry is going to be about when he's 15? Is he not going to want to love me? Is he going to have issues with his future partners because he's going to feel like my mum had this and that's what's left? And then there's that whole new wave. It just doesn't stop, basically. So that's the only way you really can recover from that, is accept that, draw a line under it and go, otherwise it's just too much.
But from the evidence base, we know that what a baby needs is that really responsive on-hand caregiver, and you and Hugo are a team. So even when he had to do the heavy lifting parent-wise for a minute, Jet wasn't missing out. He was getting exactly what he needed. Huh?
I'm his favourite.
Well, of course. But you know, sometimes you have to tag team a little bit.
Yeah.
And look, you know, that's great.
Totally. I think that as well, though, you know, even in itself, a political thing, it's like, oh, the dad is, you know, of course they're so amazing. It takes two people, but it's almost like takes people again by surprise. The idea of a dad being on his own with a baby, it's like, whereas if the dad gets ill, maybe a mum's on her own with baby, it's like, oh, but the mum's there on her own. You know, it still happens now, well, before this, but if I go out with my friends, oh, is Hugo babysitting? No, he's not babysitting. He's being a dad. You know, it's like, that's still another thing, a dynamic in itself, where I think dads always think, of course, because of the breastfeeding, if you choose to breastfeed, but dad's kind of prepared that in this role for this 6 months, he's kind of, his job's to hang there and support and make tea and do all that. He's not expected to jump into the front seat and drive the car. And so that also was a big shock, I think, for dads. Suddenly they're like, oh, whoa, this wasn't part of my plan. I was thinking you were going to lead the way and I was going to follow. So there's that too. And actually, we're so grateful now that he got plunged in the deep end, because he has had this experience that many dads don't get, that maybe feel that redundancy in that first period. He feels him and Jet have this incredible rapport, and it's, you know, it's kind of more seahorsey in our house.
So I'm going to wrap up in a few moments, but I just wanted to ask if either of you have got anything that you would like to add, any kind of final remarks. So yeah, Laura, I'll go to you first.
I guess just to stress that, I guess the purpose of doing this is to say that, yeah, COVID is really serious, and we're taking it very seriously. But actually, if you're in the throes of APP or of PP, or you believe that you're struggling in any sort of mental health illness capacity, that's probably more important, a fear or a threat to you and your family immediately at that moment. If your symptoms still persist and your GP has not diagnosed you, go back. Go get as many opinions as you need until you feel like your demands or your needs are being met properly, and talk. Just be honest, tell whoever you can about whatever you're going through, and you are not putting anybody out or worrying anybody for no reason.
I would absolutely echo that. And I guess my worry about the stay home, save lives message is that women are conditioned, I think, by society to not ask too much. You know, oh, we can just sit quietly and cope with this on our own. We don't want to be a bother. You know, the NHS is under such great strain anyway. We probably shouldn't. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Mental health services are open. Perinatal mental health services are open. Mother and baby units are open. Crisis teams are open. We're all open. Mental health is as serious as any other illness. There's every range from, you know, kind of low level up to emergencies, and PP is an obstetric emergency. You know, it's really important that we don't lose sight of that. And I guess my worry is if women are at home thinking, oh, this is another reason to not speak out, because, you know, I might get infected with COVID if I go to the hospital, or, you know, they're sort of telling us to stay home, so I'll stay home. Every measure is in place now so that the care that you'll receive will keep you safe. We've all got our infection control measures in place, so you'll be safe from infection from COVID-19, as well as receiving a thorough assessment and treatment if needed, whether that's at home or a place in hospital.
Listening quality that you're talking about, that's such a thing that maybe could only be spotted when you see somebody. Yeah,
absolutely. So, you know, don't worry about asking your midwife, your health visitor, your GP for a referral if you're worried. You know, women know themselves. They know when things are wrong, and often they only drip the information out to professionals. So if you're a professional and you see something and you think this isn't quite right, listen to your gut instinct about what it was that was missing in that consultation, what it was that she wasn't saying, or what it was that you weren't reassured by. Don't ignore it. Take that seriously, because that's probably the key.
Thank you.
We all need a Joe.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you so much, both Laura and Jo, for joining me. That was so insightful, really moving. Thank you. And a particular thank you as well to the amazing NHS for all of the things that you're doing to keep the services open and help mums and families affected by postpartum psychosis. So for anyone who's watching, if you need any help, any information about postpartum psychosis, or you want to meet others who've been affected, then please do go to the Action on Postpartum Psychosis website and get in contact with us. So thank you so much again.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Jessie. Thank you, Laura. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.